Hello there. I'm glad to see you here again. Thank you for tuning in. Well, it's 2025. Can you believe it? I know everybody says that, but it just seems like 2024, as tumultuous as it was, went by pretty fast. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. So I hope that your first week of 2025 has gone well. I wanted to kind of share some things that have come up recently. I do health and wellness coaching. And as you know, at the beginning of the year, when everybody's coming up with their New Year's resolution, it can tend to be kind of busy for people in the health and fitness industry. So I get a lot of questions about things like supplements. And I kind of wanted to talk about nutrition and basically what are the pillars of health? Like if we're just looking at physical health, what things play the biggest role in keeping us healthy? So I kind of put together a list of what I thought maybe were the top ones, but they're not exclusive and they aren't necessarily in order because they kind of tend to interlock with each other and enhance each other. But I'll go through basically what I had put down in my notes. As we've talked about, the number one thing that I believe that most people are missing is the right light exposures at the right time. So we've talked about how sunlight actually influences all of our hormones, all of our peptides, all of our enzymes, every process in our body. We can actually make things like dopamine from UV exposure on our skin, and we make cortisol from blue light exposure in our eyes. And as we've talked about before, cortisol isn't just bad, and it does raise blood sugar, which we need when we need to have energy during the day. So it's not such a bad thing to have it, but we want it at the right times and we don't want it in the middle of the night. So like a lot of people who wake up in the middle of the night or they don't sleep well, it's because they've had so much blue light exposure during the day that it hasn't told their brain that they can go into this rest and repair state that we should be in while we're sleeping. So we'll get more into light again, but I kind of want to start balancing things out by going over some other things that are really at the foundation of our whole health. And I do whole holistic wellness coaching. And so that means body, mind, and spirit, because I realized when I was really sick that uh, I wasn't addressing some of the more emotional, psychological stresses that I was under. I was just sort of, trying to deal with them without realizing that I needed to find ways to resolve them. And so, the Lord really helped me through a lot of this by pointing out things, especially in scripture, like in the book of Psalms. Those are so good. Like if you're struggling with anything in your body and your mind and your emotions, just read something like Psalm 91 aloud to yourself. It's really hard to be struggling when you're reminded of the truth of how much you're loved and protected. Okay, so after light, I would say that our emotional, psychological state is super important because, as I mentioned before, like when we have a thought, it produces chemicals in our brain. That thought tells our body what chemicals to produce, and then it can continue to stay in that mode. So let's say I'm in fear. I've used this example before. I get startled by something, and maybe the threat isn't even real, but because I'm startled, my body makes these stress hormones. Well, what does that do? It can turn down my ability to digest, because if you're having to run away from something because something is dangerous happening, your blood needs to go to your extremities, so it's not going to go to your digestion. So suddenly your digestion is cut off. And then it upregulates all your stress hormones that are like adrenaline and cortisol. And so that does all these different things in your body. If you don't turn that down, if you don't resolve those fears or that startled moment, you don't calm yourself back down, then you're going to be constantly producing those chemicals. And we can get stuck in a physical rut because of our mental ruts. So I know I've mentioned this before, but something that was really pointed out to me by the Lord was forgiveness is essential, but it's not even always just forgiving people. It can be forgiving situations. I mean, we have things happen to us that, might seem like they come out of nowhere and they're traumatic. And there's a process that we need to go through to resolve those things so that we're not hooked into feeling those same traumatized emotions over and over again, so that we can move forward into the life that the Lord has for us. So, you know, sometimes there's deep grief after losses, and we have to get to a point where we will never let go of the people that we love, but we can let go of that feeling of almost like being a victim of loss. Like, I think this is the number one thing that I see for myself and others, that we can get into sort of oh, this happened to me, and it's terrible. And we get sort of stuck in that notion of it being like our identity, like who we are. It becomes what has happened to us instead of our true identity. Our true identity is that we are in our Father in heaven. And so if we can process through things like the grief, the fear, the anger, the unforgiveness, and even things, I think one of the most tricky ones, let's just say, is when we feel shame. Like when we have done something, or maybe it's a whole like lifestyle that we lived, and one day we wake up and we're like, why am I like this? What did I do? What am I doing with my life? Why am I so terrible? That like shame can be the poison that just keeps us from loving ourselves, from loving other people, and from loving God. Because if we don't love ourselves, we can't see how He loves us. It's kind of like a cycle of, I receive love from God when I see myself like that. When I see myself as loved and lovable, then I can love others with that same love. But if I don't receive His love, I don't see myself as loved, I don't have love to love others with. So I hope that makes sense. And we might get more into that. We'll just see where this goes. Um, Other things are proper breathing. Like, a lot of times we don't breathe deep enough. Sometimes we breathe too deep. Like, I've learned some of the yoga breathing is actually not so good for us, because it can expand your diaphragm more than you want it to be expanded, so that you never actually fully release a breath. And although we know we need oxygen, we also need carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is what basically tells the blood where to take the oxygen. And I think I've talked about that before, when the blood gets oxygenated in our lungs and then our heart pumps it out into our blood vessels. When it goes out, it needs to know, well, where does that oxygen go? Well, basically the oxygen molecules get attached to the carbon dioxide molecules. So if we don't have carbon dioxide, we don't have oxygen either. So what happens is, if we breathe too fast, like, most of us know, if somebody's hyperventilating, you have them breathe into a paper bag. That's because they are hyperventilating, so they are not holding their breath in enough, long enough, to actually get the carbon dioxide in, so that into the cells, so that the blood has a place to deposit oxygen. So, we can go a long time without food, but we really need to be able to breathe fairly regularly. So if you think of it like that, if we're looking at a spectrum of what's important for health, proper breathing is going to be up there, because if we're not breathing, well, we usually pass out. So, and then the other one is hydration, and the same thing. We can go without food a lot longer than we can go without water. Although I will get more into this too. But proper hydration is not just water, because like water by itself without electrolytes, it's the same kind of thing where there's no handoff system. So the same kind of thing with oxygen needing carbon dioxide to get handed off into the cells. Well, our water needs certain minerals, what we call electrolytes, that actually pull the water into the cells as well. And then I will get to things like the exclusion zone water, which is the water inside our cells, and how we need to support that. And basically, look at like hydration. What are other ways of hydrating? And so, for instance, offhand, and this goes along with breathing, is exercise. Is that movement actually helps get electrolytes and helps us breathe properly. But you can also overdo it. So we've talked about this before. You can drink too much water. You can breathe too much, and so there's a balance to everything. So we'll talk more about that in future videos. And then I would say the next one is sleep. I mean, and again, we can go a lot longer without food than we can without sleep. I mean, you miss a day of food, you don't feel so great. You miss a whole night of sleep, and it's not good at all, right? At least I'm that way. And so, we have to make sure we know what proper sleep hygiene is. So, along with like proper light at the right time of day, you also want to make sure you have complete darkness at night. And so that might take some mitigating. And also, there are things that we can talk more about, like the temperature of your room, and even like whether you have different tech devices in your room and that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that in future videos. And then I think that probably the next thing might be nutrition. Um, and but nutrition is it should be very specific to who you are and where you are. Like I would say like seasonal eating, because again, your food, it's taking in light signals. So you're like, say you have an apple, it grew on a tree, and hopefully where you live. I live in Washington State. We have a lot of apples. So I pick them from a local, he's just a grower. He's actually a doctor, but he grows apples. So he doesn't spray them with chemicals. So I get, local organic produce. So I get local organic apples. And so what that does is the apple that I eat has been storing the light energy, which we'll talk more about this too, but the water in the plant has a memory. So it is storing the water in the plant, the water in the apple is storing information from every day that the sun hit that apple as it was growing, and probably the tree as well. So all of that information basically tells my body, it's an orientation, tells it my body when I eat that where I am, and what I need, the nutrients and everything that I need to sustain life in that area. So we'll get more into that as well. And then movement, which, like I said, all of these things aren't really isolated. They're linked to each other. So light is, linked to everything, including movement, because, the best type of exercise, I would say, is to be outdoors and to walk. And especially if you can do like barefoot walking on a beach, because you're getting some of the electromagnetic fields that we need, that our body is tuned to. So we talked about a little bit about cell phones and those types of electromagnetic fields. We'll get probably more into that as well. But our Earth has electromagnetic fields that we are basically, our biology is tuned to. So if you can walk on a beach, you don't have to go to the gym for 4 hours and lift weights and, go crazy. You can just take a nice, gentle 20-minute stroll on a beach without shoes, and you're going to get like all the benefits of the natural sunlight, of the electromagnetic fields from the earth that your body needs. And there's ionic exchanges when you're near water, and also like just the mental part of it. Like, have you ever noticed when you hear ocean waves come in and go back out, how it just seems like so refreshing to your mental state? So there's all kinds of different things about being in nature that are super effective. Like, there's something called forest bathing, and it's a big thing, I guess, in Japan, where people are like, they work a lot apparently during the day. And they're in very compact cities, like high populations. So at the weekend time, they just like go, I got to be out in nature. So often, what I've heard is many people will hop on a train and go to a forest and just like sit or walk around in a forest just to sort of bathe in that environment. And it sounds kind of crazy, but they've done studies, and apparently people who've had like super like depressive issues, depressive disorders, instead of medication, they did a controlled study where they sent them on walks in the forest. And the people who went for forest walks fared so much better on a scale of whether they were experiencing depression than those who were taking medication. So that's how powerful that is. And I have some ideas of why that is. I mean, they didn't really talk about this in this study, but to me, when you're in a forest area, you are getting all the bacteria that is in the soil is in the air. And we've talked some about, the bacteria in our system and how important that is. Well, it's it's very important for balancing everything. And on top of that, almost every type of nutrient our body needs, our bacteria will make for us. So again, back to how important is food as related to these other pillars of health. And I would say that, movement and being in nature is right up there with food, because our bacteria can make B vitamins. It can make, I think, just about every vitamin except for vitamin C. But then there's some research that kind of looks at, well, they think that maybe sunlight you can get some vitamin C from. But anyway, that's a whole other story. And being around the plants when you're forest bathing or walking in the forest or whatever, you're actually getting the infrared light from the green plants. So we absorb that light. So we've talked about red light therapy, and there's your red light therapy is just going into the forest. And then I would say another one that's right up there is relationships and community involvement. Years ago, I worked with people in a counseling setting, and there were many times where people were, super struggling. And I look back now and I realize, oh, wow, we lived in a really dark place and nobody went outside. So that could have been a lot of it. But one of the things that really helped, like, I mean, it would be like night and day with some people who struggled with like deep depression, and even like OCD or, different things, is that I would just prescribe them, go find a place you can volunteer. Don't do something that you don't want to do. Like, if you really love puppies, go volunteer at the shelter, or you like to dance, go volunteer with the dance team that goes and entertains like at the elderly folks home or something like that, or you love to cook, go work in the soup kitchen, that kind of thing. And every single time when people did this, it would resolve their depressive uh, tendencies, and it was just really quite miraculous. So we need people. Sometimes that's hard to realize, but we really do need people, and we need community. And we also need to be able to give, like not just always doing something to get something. Like there's a lot of our psycho emotional state that's tied into like the joy of giving. You know, you've heard it's better to give than to receive and that kind of thing. Well, that's part of it, is that we actually get a lot of our good emotional and psychological states from feeling a sense of doing something meaningful or giving back to people. But we also need to receive. Like there's a symbiosis. Like we need to be able to graciously receive when people give to us too. That's part of being in community. It's not just all one-sided, you know, like you just have to give, give, give and never receive anything. There's two sides to it. Anyway, so we can go more into that, and probably more into light and how that affects everything. But I kind of wanted to, just start the new year with like a broad brushstroke of here's all these things that we can talk about in the future related to our health. And let me leave you with one scripture. How about from Second Peter chapter 1, verse 3? Everything we need for life and godliness has already been deposited in us by his divine power. Wow. So just think about that. Just think about like how I was saying bacteria make a lot of our minerals and vitamins. It's like we've already been given everything we need. And we just have to really hone in on thinking that way and not thinking that we're just like in this world and bad things are happening and we have no control at all. It's like we actually we're loved, you're loved, and your Father in heaven has given you everything that you need. So I hope that brightens your day, and I hope that I get to see you in the future, and thank you for tuning in, and God bless you. We'll see you next time.